The students were then introduced to more complex patterns. Looking at the top pattern, which we call the flower pattern, what columns make up the unit of repeat or pattern core? What about the pattern core for the pattern at the bottom, which we call the green X pattern? The top pattern is pretty straightforward. 5 columns make up the pattern core. The bottom pattern is a little trickier, and initially most students believed that the core was made up of 5 columns, probably because they were attending to the green X. However, when looking at column 6, they realized that it didn't look like column 1, but that the first column repeated again in column 5, meaning the pattern core was made up of columns 1 to 4, and then repeated again starting at column 5. They mapped out the units of repeat along the 20-column template. In the video, you can hear one student making predictions that extend beyond the template. Looking at these two patterns, the students discovered that for the flower pattern, which has a 5-column core, 4 iterations of the core filled the 20 columns of the template. For the green X pattern, they discovered that for the 4-column core, 5 iterations of the core filled the 20-column template. So, in this one lesson, students were exposed to the idea of the commutative property of multiplication. 4 times 5 equals 20, and 5 times 4 equals 20. This also helped them to explain the notion of groups of, and why, although both 5 times 4 and 4 times 5 equal 20, it's important to know the context of the groups. The flower pattern models 4 groups of 5, and the green X pattern models 5 groups of 4. With this pattern, students also explored the pattern core in terms of the number of beads in each core. The flower pattern has 25 beads per core, 25 times 4, while the green X pattern had 20 beads per core, 20 times 5. Students used these units to determine the total number of beads needed for each pattern on the template. Both patterns require 100 beads. The last pattern introduced to the students was a chevron pattern. In order to make identifying the unit of repeat easier, and put up special math tools called occluders on the interactive whiteboard. These could be dragged to hide different parts of the pattern in order to help students discern which columns were repeating. This led to an interesting discussion because some students attended to the first orange chevron and so saw the unit of repeat from columns 3 to 6. Then other students wondered if the entire pattern core was made of columns 1 to 6, but realized this could not be the case since column 1 and column 7 were different. Therefore, column 7 was not the beginning of a new core. Through class discussion, they determined the core was made up of columns 1 to 4. In this video, we'll see students explicitly talk about multiplication. So, one of the most important concepts underpinning multiplicative thinking is the idea of unitizing. Unitizing is the ability to perceive and consider a unit simultaneously as one unit and as the number of elements that make up the unit. So in this case, the pattern core was considered as either a unit of columns and or a unit of beads. So 5 columns or 25 beads. Through these investigations, students co-constructed an understanding of multiplicative thinking, and the language of multiplication was introduced. When determining the pattern core, students identified groups of columns that made up the core, then focused on how many iterations of the unit was possible on the 20-column template, and progressed from skip counting by 5s or 4s to repeated addition to thinking about groups of. They also engaged in an initial exploration of the commutative property of multiplication. And students also explored the number of beads in each unit and used that to determine the total number of beads in one template. When considering number of beads instead of number of columns, students skip counted by units of 20 or 25 to determine the number of total beads.